I think one of the greatest feelings you can have as a book lover is realizing that an author of one of your favorite books is coming out with a prequel or a sequel, and that it's releasing imminently. And this has been a good year for that, for me anyway. I absolutely loved Samantha Shannon's The Priory of the Orange Tree and its prequel, A Day of Fallen Night. And when I learned there was going to be a third book in this world, Among the Burning Flowers, I was extremely excited and immediately went on NetGalley and requested a copy and was accepted, which was very exciting. But then I had a very overwhelming, busy August, which I've already talked about on this channel, and only was able to read a chapter or two of the ebook before the book was properly released and my pre-order came in the mail. So I decided, since I was only a couple chapters in, that it would be fun to restart with a physical copy so I could annotate, because I know I'm gonna love it as much as I loved the other two books in this series. And I thought, why not take you along with me, do a reading vlog? This could be fun. And then I thought, if one is fun, why not 2 or 3? Why not multiply the excitement? There are 2 more sequels coming out this fall to books that I really enjoyed. One is We Love You, Bunny, which is the sequel to Bunny by Mona Awad. And the other is The Strength of the Few, which is the sequel to The Will of the Many by James Islington. So that's what I'm gonna do. This is yet another continuing in series that I've loved video. So I'm gonna go start Among the Burning Flowers, since this is the only one that is currently released and that I have in my hands. And when I get to the halfway point, I'll be back to share my initial thoughts. So let's do it. As you may have noticed, I've been wearing a very futuristic sci-fi looking device while reading. That is the Foreo FAQ 202 LED mask, which has been a staple in my routine for months, and I'm super excited to tell you all about it today because this video is kindly sponsored by Foreo. So if you've ever wanted to try any of Foreo's incredible best-selling devices, hang tight and watch this segment because they have a huge Black Friday deal going on that I can't wait to tell you about. I've been aware of Foreo for many years at this point. I frequent quite a few different skincare communities online, and I finally bit the bullet a couple years ago after turning 30 and waking up one day and just feeling like my face looked like it wasn't my own anymore. Everything had shifted by a millimeter or so, and the effect was very jarring. Now, of course, I don't think there's anything wrong with aging. I think aging is an amazing privilege that I really hope I get to have, but I do also think it's natural to want to hold on to our youth as long as we can and to feel like ourselves. And for me personally, surgical procedures or injections, not the path I want to go down. I personally want to take a more holistic approach, I suppose, by living a healthy life and trying to take care of my skin with good skincare and taking advantage of these amazing advancements in technology with skincare devices that I can use to give myself treatments at home. So after doing some research and reading a lot of reviews, I knew I wanted to try Foreo's Bears, and I decided to go with the Bear Mini. How cute is it? Oh my God. I've had this for, like I said, a few years now, and I use it all the time. And I really felt like I noticed changes in my face and how lifted it felt and just feeling more like I looked like myself again. And because I had such a great experience with the little mini bear, when Foreo reached out asking if I wanted to try their FAQ 202 LED mask, I was immediately on board. FAQ 202 is an FDA cleared new generation LED face mask. It's made of silicone and super lightweight, and it's wireless, so it's really convenient to wear around the house. As you can see, I've been loving to wear it and do my treatments while reading. Because it's so light and flexible, it can adjust to fit different faces. I personally have a very big head, so I was a bit worried, but it fits perfectly and it covers all the areas it has to. It has 8 different wavelengths, including NIR, to tackle signs of aging and other skin concerns. The main concerns that I wanted to try to address with the FAQ 202 were early signs of aging and a bit of dullness in my skin, but also breakouts, because unfortunately I'm in my 30s, but I still get breakouts like clockwork every month, and I have actually found a great benefit from using the FAQ 202. I've noticed that my hormonal breakouts are far less severe, and also that inflammation seems a lot lower, and my breakouts are healing within a couple days instead of hanging around for a week or more. I also feel like the redness that I get in my cheeks hasn't been as prominent, and my skin tone overall is looking more even and less dull. The FAQ 202 connects to the Foreo app, so you can use some of their pre-designed treatments, so you can just set it and forget it. Or if you want to target very specific things, you can go into the manual settings. Plus, as an added benefit, you look super cool and like you're from the future when you use it. I've also been using the mask with the recommended FAQ red light peptide serum. And once you're done with the treatment, you can continue on with your skincare routine as you regularly do. It's really cool to see how far technology has come when it comes to skincare, and being able to do these kinds of really advanced treatments at home conveniently is actually amazing. Check out the Foreo FAQ 202 LED mask and their amazing Black Friday deals at the link in my description box. And don't forget to use code BRIDE35 for an extra 35% off your purchase. And these codes are stackable, so you can put it on top of the already amazing deals on the website for Black Friday, meaning you can get up to 50% off on Foreo's products, which is such an incredible deal, and I'm so excited to share it with you. Thank you again so much to Foreo for sponsoring this video, and let me know in the comments if you pick up any of their products or devices during the Black Friday deal. I'd love to know what you're trying out or your experiences if you've already used their incredible products. Oh, hey, I'm back. It's been a minute. I think it's been like a month and a half since I filmed the introduction to this video. mostly just because I had so many other videos I was filming simultaneously, so many other books I was reading, that I just kept putting off reading this one. And then finally, yesterday, it occurred to me that it's now November and I probably should actually properly read this. And when I actually let myself sit down and focus on it and dedicate time to it, I was drawn so into it and so immersed that I really struggled to stop to go to sleep last night. And then when I hit the 50% mark this morning, I really struggled. Technically, I read a chapter or two past the 50% mark because I just didn't want to put it down. So as you might be able to tell based on that, I'm really enjoying this so far. Not that that's surprising because I loved Priory of the Orange Tree and I didn't expect this to be any different, but I just think I've been in a bit of a mood reading place where I'm picking up a lot of literary fiction and horror and just darker fiction in general. And while I wouldn't say this series is particularly light and fluffy, it is definitely more of a traditional epic fantasy kind of structure. But once I decided that it was time to read this and I just let Samantha Shannon's prose wash over me and started to get to know these characters, I was a goner. I love Samantha Shannon's characters so much. They are the kinds of characters that you get attached to very quickly. So far, we've had 3 separate point of view characters. So we start with Morosa, and she is a princess in Iskalin. And then we move over to Estina, Malago. And I think Estina only has a handful of chapters. She definitely doesn't feel as prominent so far as Morosa does, but I was so attached to Estina so quickly that by the time we got to, I think it was the 2nd or the 3rd chapter with her, I was deeply invested in her romance with this other character that had barely been on the page so far, and them having some conversations about their relationship and where they're at and their level of commitment for each other literally had me crying. And we'd only known this character for a couple chapters, and the other character wasn't even there the whole time. I was just kind of in awe of Samantha Shannon's ability to make me care so deeply about her characters in such a small amount of pages, because at least with the other 2 books, they're pretty hefty books and we have lots of different characters, but because the books are so long, you do get quite a bit of page time with each of the different point of view characters. This one is quite short in comparison. It's coming in at under 300 pages. So the fact that I'm so invested already is quite a feat. And then our 3rd point of view character is the betrothed from another kingdom of Morosa, Albrecht. Hopefully I'm pronouncing everyone's names correctly. And he, I think, has only had 2 chapters so far. Definitely haven't had a huge amount of time to get attached to him, but I do find him interesting and I enjoy his chapters. It's not like I turn the page and see that it's going to be a point of view character for Albrecht and I get mad that I have to spend time with him. I find him interesting. I'm just not quite as attached to him yet. He's had even less page time than the other ones. And as per usual with this series, the writing is just so gorgeous. It is dense and descriptive and evocative. It is poetic, but not in a overwrought way. It's sort of an understated poesy. Just a pleasure to read. I love that descriptive language that is more detailed, that is evocative, that allows me to really imagine the setting in great detail. And I feel like Samantha Shannon is great at that, which is awesome for fantasy, especially obviously because you're building a brand new world. And so everything has to be developed from scratch. So being able to envision it really clearly in your mind, if you have the ability to do so, is a really great benefit, I think, for the fantasy genre and other speculative fiction genres. But I'm really, really liking it so far. It's definitely less epic feeling than the other 2. Sorry, my light went out. I would say this one feels a tiny bit less epic than the other 2, if only because most of the characters are a lot more stationary. There aren't these really wide-ranging journeys, and so far no big battles. We have had a few exciting sequences that are more action-heavy, I would say, but definitely feels a little bit more slow-paced and quiet than the other 2, which I don't mind. I'm liking it so far, but knowing what I know just from the other 2 books in the series, I wouldn't be surprised if the second half becomes much more intense, has some longer battles, maybe has a journey or 2, or maybe a complex plan put into place with lots of moving parts. So we'll see if that comes to fruition, but even if it doesn't, I could see this being satisfying just as a quieter, more understated installment in the series, despite there still being some pretty big, world-changing events happening. So far, I would say thematically, this is still quite congruous to the rest of the series. We have explorations of grief, examining political, societal structures and how different societies interact. We have how faith is intertwined in politics and in characters' lives and their understanding of the world they live in. We have different types of monarchies and how they pass the crown down to the next generation and the expectations on the next generation. We have the differing expectations of men and women. We have explorations of class differences and how the experiences of the lower classes differ greatly from those of the upper classes and the royalty. I would say it feels very in line with what the rest of the series is delivering. And we also have a sapphic romance developing for one of our characters, which is lovely so far, and I'm enjoying it. Definitely not as prominent. Oh, hi, Chewy. Definitely not as prominent, I would say, as the romances in the other 2 installments, although I'm only in the first half, so it could develop further from here. There's also a chance for another romance, but that one is still in early stages, and outside circumstances have stopped them from really developing their relationship any further, so we'll see if that goes anywhere, but I'm really liking this so far. I would say it is slower paced and maybe less exciting than the other 2 so far, but definitely just as immersive, and I'm just as drawn in. I'm loving the characters just as much, so I'm still having a great time regardless. And I think that's going to be it for my halfway update. I'll be back to let you know my final thoughts when I finish it. Probably tomorrow, because there's not really that much more to go, and like I said, I really had to struggle to tear myself away. So I have a feeling that now that I have permission to finish it, I will do so rapidly. So I will see you soon. Okay, so I have now finished Among the Burning Flowers by Samantha Shannon. I liked this a lot. I will say that. I liked all the point of view characters. I liked the stories that we got. I liked learning more about these particular characters. I didn't reread Priory of the Orange Tree before picking this up, and I read it 4 years ago. And this was before I annotated. It was before I took extensive notes. It was before I was using my Notion reading trackers. So I went into this just with what I could remember from 4 years ago, and I've read literally hundreds of books since then. So I must say it wasn't super fresh in my mind, and I didn't immediately remember who the 3 protagonists were. That being said, despite not remembering who they were right away, I really liked them all. Like I said in the halfway update, I was attached to them very quickly, especially Estina Malago's chapters really pulled me in, and her romance. And I will say that it is maybe because I was so drawn to Estina that I was a bit disappointed by this, because I felt a little bit cheated by how much she was part of the story at the beginning of the book, and then she just never showed up again in the second half. She just disappeared entirely from the narrative for no particular reason, and I found that really disappointing. I feel like even one short point of view chapter in the second half would have at least been a acknowledgement of her still being alive and being part of the story, because she does show up in Priory of the Orange Tree, which happens after this, so he knows she survives. But why was she only there for a couple chapters at the start and then nothing else? Especially the way it was paced at the beginning. It made it feel like Marosa and Estina were going to be our two main protagonists, with maybe some other protagonists thrown in there. And instead, really, this was almost entirely Marosa's story, with a couple little vignettes of Estina and a couple little vignettes of Albrecht. And I think for Albrecht to have a couple vignettes, it makes sense based on his role in Marosa's story and the way that that story plays out, and it gives a bit more context to his character and for the role he plays in Priory of the Orange Tree. And I hesitate to say that Estina's chapters should just be pulled out, because I really loved them, but maybe they should have. Maybe that should have been a separate little short story giving more context for her, or maybe it should have been saved for another book that focused on the privateers and told her story. I understand that the beginning of her story overlaps with what's happening in Iskallin and what's happening to Marosa, but if you were going to tell her story, you should have kept telling her story. This is mostly me being mad because I liked the characters so much, because I enjoy the world that Samantha Shannon has built so much, and I really enjoy her writing and her character development and the way she develops relationships, both romantic and platonic, that I was very attached to Estina very quickly, and then the fact that she disappeared made me very sad. So it's both a compliment, I guess, to Samantha Shannon, and also a critique, because what the heck? Why are you doing this to me? Overall, I really liked this. Like I said, it is mostly Marosa's story, and I did enjoy it. I found it interesting. I liked Marosa as a character. I really liked the development of her relationship with her primary lady in waiting, Priessa. Their dynamic was quite lovely, and I really appreciated the elaboration, filling in the world building and the context for what was happening in other countries, because in Priory of the Orange Tree, we do focus primarily on the experience in Innis, and we hear what's happening vaguely in Iskallin, and we do follow some characters on a journey there as ambassadors, but it is very brief, and it was nice to get that context filled out. I know people will ask me this, so I will share what I think probably makes sense for the reading order with a bit of a caveat. I would say starting with Among the Burning Flowers probably makes sense, and then reading Priory of the Orange Tree, and then reading A Day of Fallen Night, which is 500 years in the past after that, which just fills out the history and gives you more context, with the caveat that I would basically say you should read Among the Burning Flowers directly before reading the Priory of the Orange Tree, like right away, because it gives so much context and it's set so shortly before the events of this book. Not that this doesn't stand alone, because it does as a story. It just doesn't have nearly as much going on. It's much shorter. It is exploring characters who have their story arcs expanded upon and completed in this book, although in reality it's more that their backstories are filled in, but you know what I mean. It can stand alone, but I think it stands much stronger. You know, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, and that's not necessarily a terrible thing, although I do wish that this was a little longer, a little more complete feeling as its own story, because I did feel like the Priory of the Orange Tree and, well, this was written as a standalone, so that makes sense. This does stand alone. It's also gigantic. But A Day of Fallen Night, especially because it's set 500 years in the past, as much as it's building on the same world and on the legends and explaining things that we've already learned about, I think you could read it as its own separate story, and it does stand alone. This one, if only because it's so short, just has less going on. And I must admit, as you might be able to tell, because I originally read this before I started annotating, but you might notice all the tabs here, you can actually compare to the first time I read it when I only used tabs to mark my absolute favorite quotes, compared to how I use tabs now. I started rereading the Priory of the Orange Tree basically immediately upon finishing Among the Burning Flowers because I wanted to remember the context of these characters, and it made me crave more from this world, which maybe is what a prequel should do. I don't know. Maybe you pick this up, and if you really want to know more, that's the impetus, that's the motivation to pick up an over 800-page book and to make your way through it. Maybe it's evil genius. I don't know. But I will say, to be consistent with what I've said in the past, I do prefer that each segment, each installment in a series stand on its own, even if it is irrevocably linked to the other books in the series. You definitely don't have to reread Priory of the Orange Tree, but maybe reading a summary or two, or if you took extensive notes, or if you annotated kind of flipping through to remind yourself of the basics, especially to remind yourself of what happened with Marosa and Albrecht and Estina in the original book. That would help here. I'm excited to keep reading this. I might end up picking up A Day of Fallen Night once I finish this again, just to spend more time in this world. Anyway though, Among the Burning Flowers, this was great. I really, really liked it, but there is just less substance to it because it is much shorter. And I think it was hard for it to live up to my expectations after two massive door stoppers that had so many characters and so much happening plot-wise and politically, and so much examination and deep dives into societies and cultures and religion and myths and roles of women in society. And not to say that this doesn't explore that too, because it does, but it does it on a much smaller scale and in a much shorter time frame. And so I felt it was a little less impactful, or maybe my expectations were just too high. But I think right now I am sitting at 4 stars for this. I think so. I might bump it up to 5, especially once I finish reading Priory of the Orange Tree, if I feel like reading this has really improved the experience of reading this book. It already has had an impact on me in that it made me feel much more deeply for Albrecht as a character. So that was great to have a lot more context for him. But so far, I don't know if it's going to be enough of an impact to feel like it deserves 5 stars past my couple stumbling blocks of mostly the length, and then Estina getting shafted and just disappearing for no reason after I got attached. It's very rude. Anyway, so yeah, 4 stars for Among the Burning Flowers. I'm not really going to do a spoiler section. I'll do a very, very, very short one. Spoilers for Among the Burning Flowers, and also for the Priory of the Orange Tree. If you haven't read the Priory of the Orange Tree, don't watch the spoiler section, even if you have read Among the Burning Flowers, because I will spoil something that happens in this book. Use the chapters in the description box to skip past this little spoiler section. It's gonna take you 2 seconds. Okay, so spoilers. Like I said, Albrecht is more of a vignette in this book. He shows up just a couple times, has only, under 5 chapters, I think, if I'm remembering correctly. But I really came to like him both through his chapters, but also through Marosa's eyes, because she'd only met him a handful of times, but felt so drawn to him and basically just had a huge crush on him and was really excited to get married and to escape her prison as a princess in a tower and her abusive father, but also just to be with this guy who she thought was actually really kind, and they had things in common, and she really liked him. So I started liking him a lot, and then we got his chapters and saw from his perspective how kind he was and how thoughtful and how much he cared for his family, how much he loved his sisters especially, and how much he worried for his realm, and how much he cared for and worried about Marosa, even though they'd only met a handful of times and really didn't know each other that well, and how much he grieved the loss of their marriage because he had to break off the engagement because of Isglin being taken over by dragons, converting away from the 7 virtues from the saint, how devastated he was about that, and how much he wanted to go himself to try to save Marosa, and realized he couldn't because of his responsibilities to his country, to his people, as prince and the heir to the throne. And I just became really attached to him. I really liked him as a character, and I didn't remember what happened to him in the Priory of the Orange Tree. I remembered that he married Sabran, and I remembered that the main romance in Priory of the Orange Tree was Sabran and Iad. But then I picked up and started rereading this book, and we get to the scene where he convinces Sabran to visit her people on the street, even though everyone was saying it's a bad idea, and then he gets fucking murdered. I lost my shit. I was so upset. It really made that scene hit so much harder. I mean, now that I've read it again, I remember reading it the first time and I was upset the first time because he seemed like a nice guy, and also Sabran was completely devastated, and just generally it was so shocking and unexpected. But this time it hit so much harder because we actually knew him on a deeper level, and he was such a sweet little potato. Not a potato. He was a sweet little jelly roll of a king who is actually very nice, really seemed to respect and revere Sabran because she's a religious figure in the faith that he follows. And he just seems like a really, really, really sweet, nice guy. So, maybe that's enough for Among the Burning Flowers to be a 5-star read. Maybe that, justifies its existence even in its, shortened form, just adding that extra context. And obviously Morosa too, but again, like I said, I can't really remember how much more of a role Morosa plays in the rest of this book. I mean, it definitely added more context to the scenes we've had with Morosa so far, especially with Loth, but I don't know. I think I'm still sitting at 4 stars, but that scene hit much harder after reading the prequel, and it broke my heart into a million tiny pieces. So that's the spoiler. That's all I'm going to say about Among the Burning Flowers. 4 stars for now. I did really enjoy it. But why, oh why, Samantha Shannon, would you give us a couple chapters about Estina and then totally drop her as if she never existed? I am personally offended. Definitely not a total letdown or anything, but yeah, my expectations were pretty high, so I think it would have been hard to meet them without, again, maybe writing another 800-page tome. So now I'm going to move on to the second book for this video, the second sequel/prequel to a book that I absolutely loved, resulting in extremely high expectations that might shoot me in the foot. And that is We Love You, Bunny by Mona Awad. I love Bunny so much. Such a great, weird book that I adore. And I was so excited to dive into this. I am now almost halfway through. I must admit, I finished Among the Burning Flowers yesterday, and then I just got too excited to wait until I film my review. I just had to start reading We Love You, Bunny. So I have been reading this already. I will insert some clips of me reading after this, and then I'll come back once I do get to the halfway point. I have a couple more chapters, and I'll share my initial thoughts, but I'm not going to say anything until I get to the halfway point. I'm going to save it. Okay, it's been like an hour. I'm now at the halfway point of We Love You, Bunny. So let me share my thoughts. My thoughts so far are that I'm liking it. I've been very nervous. I think I said this in the intro because I saw a lot of people talk about how this was a letdown. They loved Bunny and they hated this, or it just was a big disappointment, or it explained too much. And I'm only halfway through. So, we have another 200 plus pages where things could really go off the rails. Maybe it really drags for the rest of the book. Maybe it does over-explain everything and becomes tedious and terrible. But so far, I'm having fun, to be totally honest. I feel like this is bringing back a lot of what I loved about Bunny. Characters you absolutely love to hate. Weird, codependent, obsessive, almost cultish level female friendships. Random acts of extreme violence from people who you wouldn't expect random acts of extreme violence to come from. Biting, very self-aware critique of MFA programs and just fine arts programs in general, academia in general. The self-obsession, the pretension, the dramatics of being in an arts program with a bunch of other people who are all weirdly obsessed with whatever it is that they're creating, the place that they feel they belong within the genre, within their medium, and carving their own path and recognition for their creative genius, and a lot of insecurity and trauma and wounds that are being triggered constantly by the competitive and critical environment of getting a degree in an artistic field. I didn't do an MFA program, but I have a degree in musical theater, and like I said, I'm sure when I reviewed Bunny and every time I've talked about it since, very relatable, okay? No random acts of violence on my part while in theater school, but I can't lie, may have crossed my mind. Just kidding. But I can relate to developing friendships that are obsessively and unhealthily intertwined, codependent, very close, very fast, where you kind of lose your own identity, but then also that undertone of passive aggressiveness and competitiveness and fighting for scraps of recognition and attention and praise from your teachers and feeling like you deserve to be there as a performer, as a writer, as a creative, as an artist. There is just this desperation that is very true to my own experience. And I just feel like Mona Awad writes it so well. It is hilarious. It's just so funny because it's so ridiculous, but that can be what it's like. The pretension, like, yes, it's brought to more of an absurd level for comedic effect, but honestly, sometimes not even. Some of the things that these characters say to each other that are purposefully over the top and dramatic and pretentious and ridiculous are the kinds of things that I said and other people said to me while in theater school. It's just the nature of the beast to a certain extent, I think, and maybe unrelatable to people who haven't gone through a similar kind of program, but I just find it kind of cathartic and very entertaining to read about this sort of environment. And so far, I'm really loving getting more backstory for all the bunnies. I'm loving, getting to know why they are the way they are. What did their personality grow out of? What are their attachment wounds? What are their flaws and foibles? Why were they drawn to this collective mindscape? And I'm enjoying the premise, the way that it's set up, and why they're telling their stories now, who they're telling it to. I won't give any spoilers, but I love it. It's quite fitting and I think appropriately menacing. So that's great. Also, now that I'm into part 2, I'm several chapters into part 2 now at the halfway point, we have a new point of view character who I did not expect to hear from. And again, no spoilers, I won't tell you who it is, but very interesting and honestly very endearing, kind of surprisingly, but I'm very endeared. Another thing I like about this is that each section being told by a different bunny reflects their personality, but also their writing style and their subgenre, what their focus is in writing. So kind of all of their little quirks and habits of speech, but also their writing, their prose comes out in their chapters. And I find that interesting to see the differences between each chapter. And the audiobook narrator, which I'm listening to simultaneously, is doing a great job of doing all the voices and really embodying the different people. Really liked that shift. And now that we're at this new point of view character, we have yet another shift in the writing style. And at first I found it not jarring. There are sort of little emojis, just like an analog old school emoji for the millennials and above in the audience, of little smiley faces and frowny faces. And at first it felt quite jarring in contrast to the more elevated, archaic writing style of this point of view character. But it's starting to grow on me. I kind of like it. Again, it's adding this endearing quality of this character having this maybe more mature, erudite way of expressing themselves, but they also are sort of charmingly naive and vulnerable and wear their heart on their sleeve. And those emojis kind of reinforce that and keep that in our mind and remind us of sort of where they are at developmentally, I guess. And I find it endearing, as I've said a bunch of times. But yeah, I'm just having fun. I'm having fun with it. Who knows? Like I said, things could really go off the rails. But so far it's weird and funny and entertaining, and I don't really feel like it's over-explaining anything so far. They don't really know what's going on either, so it's not like the book, at least so far, is giving us a step-by-step explanation of how and why this is happening. We just get to see it through different eyes, which I'm liking. So anyway, we'll see, I guess, but that's kind of where I'm at. I'm having a good time. I'm enjoying it, so I'm gonna keep going, but I will do a quick spoiler section, I guess. Yeah, I will, just to talk about a couple of the things that I tried to stay cagey about for anyone who hasn't read this yet. So let's do a quick spoiler section for the first half of We Love You, Bunny, starting now. Spoilers. Use the chapters to skip this if you don't want to be spoiled. Okay, so basically, the premise or the way it's set up is that the bunnies have heard that Sam published a novel, and this novel is very heavily based on their experience in their MFA program, and she very barely changed their names and a couple details and just wrote their story from her own perspective, which they feel is very skewed and unfair in a lot of ways. And they heard that she was doing a book tour, and they were all pretty mad about the book. So they agreed to kidnap her and bring her to the attic where it all began, and tie her up and gag her and force her to listen to their version of events so they can set the record straight because they're pissed. So we kind of go one by one as the four bunnies share their perspective on what happened and sort of how they got to that point when Sam joined them, and trying to, getting in lots of very heavily passive aggressive and sometimes just outright aggressive jabs at her, and also being very threatening, holding the blood-flecked axe while she's all tied up in the attic where much violence occurred in the first book. That's kind of the setup, is that they're telling Sam and they're very pissed off at her writing them a particular way. And they're also kind of pissed off at each other. Like, it seems like they haven't maybe really stayed in touch. Their bond is kind of frayed or fallen apart. They're all doing their own thing, and they are more aware of each other's flaws and foibles, and they're also pissed off at each other for the roles that they all played. And they don't like how everyone else is telling the story and how everyone's taking ownership of or responsibility for the more mystical elements or the more powerful, amazing things that happened, and framing themselves as the main character in all of their stories. But I found that very entertaining. But then we get into part 2, and we get the perspective of the bunny turned man, Arius, who is so named because of a box of allergy medication, Arius, which at some point it's mentioned in this book as if Americans haven't heard of Arius, like it's specifically a Canadian medication, which maybe makes sense because I've seen Arius in Canadian drugstores. I haven't been in that many American drugstores, and certainly not for many years, so I can't remember off the top of my head, nor was I specifically shopping for allergy medication at any of those times. But anyway, let me know, because most of my audience is American. Do you have Arius allergy medication in the US, or is that a Canadian thing? What about Claritin? I'm not that invested. I just find it funny that he's named after it. And it also seems to specifically be Canadian because Mona Awad is Canadian, but this is set in the US. Anyway, regardless, moving on. He has been trapped up in the attic because they turned a bunny into a boy, and then realized he was kind of wrong and kind of taking some of their, darkest feelings and impulses a little too literally, like the fact that they hate their advisor, the professor who's running their workshop, Alan, and they keep talking about how they want to kill him because he's really critiquing their work. And Arius takes it seriously and thinks he should definitely actually kill Alan. So they're keeping him tied up in the attic, and they're trying to revise him by educating him with literature and film and music, and spending time with him and trying to encourage him to grow and evolve and become fully human, or at least a little less impulsive and violent. But on Halloween, of all nights, he escapes, and we follow him as he is finally free. And his writing style is very, like I said, sort of erudite and has a old time quality, in part because of the books that they've been reading to him and the films they've been having him watch. He talks like someone from a different time and uses his little smiley and frowny face emojis to portray his feelings as he's writing. And it does seem like he is writing his memories of this time in the future when maybe he was recaptured by the bunnies, just from some of the context. But we're following him as I stopped. It's the morning after Halloween, so we really just spent one night with him. But like I said, he's actually very endearing, considering he is a literal axe murderer. At this point, he murdered a random frat kid on Halloween because he was dressed up as a reference to Edgar Allan Poe to some of his work. And they brought up Edgar Allan Poe, and Arius knows he has to kill Alan. So he was like, oh shit, you're Alan. So he cut off his head with the axe. But he was just a random frat bro at a Halloween party in his frat house. So there's that. And then he also burns down a bar after a poetry reading he very viscerally hated. So, he's an arsonist and he's an axe murderer, but he's also kind of cute. I'm not going to lie. He's very endearing, naive. He's a rabbit in human form, and he's still very heavily rabbit coded, and he doesn't know what's happening. He's like a freshly born human in an adult body who also has all of the darkest feelings and thoughts and impulses of 4 very fucked up, traumatized MFA candidates that built him, sort of roiling around in his brain, and access to weapons. So there's that. I just can't help but root for him, to be totally honest. Like, I want him to stay free of the bunnies and, I don't know, find happiness with Jonah somewhere. He's also fallen in love with Jonah, who I don't remember particularly from the first book, but I guess he was in love with Sam. They would smoke together, take smoke breaks. So he's in love with Sam, but he's also kind of inextricably drawn to Arius, and they end up spending a lovely night together. And Arius is like fully 100% in love with Jonah. And Jonah is very conflicted because he thought he was in love with Sam, but now he's had this great night with Arius and he really enjoyed himself, and he is just drawn to Arius, but he feels guilty because he thought he loved Sam, and now he's very conflicted. So who knows where that's going to go, because it just left off basically Jonah telling him that his class is next to where the writing workshop is happening, where Alan is running it, and Arius gets all excited that he can finally kill the proper Alan and fix his oops from Halloween night where he killed random frat boy. So they're going to campus, and who knows what's going to happen next. I assume he'll be recaptured by the bunnies. Again, I can't remember in the first book if Alan was murdered. I don't remember Alan at all, to be totally honest with you. I remember much more of the bunny and Sam related activities than the men. I don't really remember any of the men from the first book. The women were much more interesting, but I'm really liking Arius's point of view. Like I said, he's oddly endearing, and he's really in love with Jonah. And I mean, it's probably more limerence. He's only met him now twice. He's also a rabbit / newborn human in an adult body with 4 different personalities banging around in there. So I don't know. He's in a complicated place, probably not ready for a serious relationship. But some of their dialogue back and forth and some of their yearning glances and sweet moments together just tugged at my heartstrings, I'm not gonna lie. And the way that he's carrying, who was it? Coraline? I don't know which one is her actual name at this point. I think her actual name is Caroline, but she's going by Coraline in this book because that's what Sam called her in her book, Cupcake. Anyway, she had a stuffed animal of a pony who she gave to Arius, and he's carrying it around with him in his pocket and talking to Pony, and Pony is answering him, at least in his head, I assume. And I find that extra relatable. I'm pretty sure they said Pony is pink. Maybe I made that up, or maybe I just added that detail because my stuffed animal as a kid that I was most attached to was named Pony, very creative, and was a pony and is pink. Mostly pink. Also has some blue and white, but, generally a pink pony that my grandma made for me. And so I can relate both to the pink pony stuffed animal. I should try to find it. I know I have it somewhere in the house in storage. Maybe I should try to find it so that I can prove my solidarity with Coraline, Caroline, Cupcake. But it's cute that Arius is carrying Pony around, along with his axe and the razor blade, so he's always prepared for violence. But yeah, I don't know where this is going to go, but I am very entertained, I'm not going to lie. Placing bets on whether they let Sam live. I think they will. I think they'll let Sam go. I think maybe murdering like a full, true, proper human, even one who lied so viciously about them in print, is a little too far for them. Murdering their rabbit turned newborn human in adult body boys was more justifiable for them, especially when they started doing random acts of violence. But I think they'll avoid killing Sam. But who knows? Could go either way. Anyway, that's it for spoilers. Those are all my thoughts for the first half of We Love You, Bunny. I'm having a really fun time, so I'm gonna go finish it. I'm feeling good right now. I'm feeling confident. Also, my copy of The Strength of the Few came in the mail. This finally was published. I'd pre-ordered it, so it arrived. So this will be my next read. I'm gonna go finish this. I'll be back. Hi, Bunny. It's so good to see you again. I finally finished We Love You, Bunny, and I have thoughts to share about, like, you know, the literary merit of this piece of fiction, and I'd love to discuss it with you in workshop maybe, or Smut Salon, you know, whatever works for you. Let me know your schedule, you know, if you're into it or something. It would be so great, Bunny. Anyway, let's talk about We Love You, Bunny, and I'm not going to do this voice the whole time because I can't. I just had flashbacks to theater school where my vocal teachers continually nagged at me to speak in a higher register because it would be gentler on my vocal cords, and I just couldn't. I felt like I was playing a part 24/7 and I couldn't do it. Anyways, I am dressed all on theme today. I was getting ready to film and thought, why not get fully into it? So I'm wearing my little bunny vest and my little vintage frothy blouse and even a little plaid mini skirt, which you can't see on camera. Sorry. But it's there, I promise. I'm not wearing pajama pants for once. And I really liked this. Did I like it as much as I liked Bunny? No. I think it would have been hard for this to be as great as Bunny, especially within the context of it being sort of a direct prequel/sequel and rehashing the events of the first book a little bit, giving us the context of the first year of their MFA program. And for that reason, I'm a little bit baffled, to be totally frank, by all of the vitriol towards this book. I mean, okay, if you hated Bunny, I would understand hating this book. If you hated Bunny, I'm not sure why you read this book, but if you did, I can understand it. But if you loved Bunny, I'm a bit confused by hating this because it's really, obviously it's not the exact same book, but it's doing a lot of similar things. Maybe slightly less up for interpretation than the first book, but honestly, there's still a lot happening that we have no hard evidence that it's actually happening the way that the narrative is telling us it is. I think a lot of people reading this are taking this as fact, And I'm not quite sure why, because in Bunny itself, part of the fun of Bunny, not quite knowing how much we can trust our narrator, an unreliable narrator who is suffering from a bit of a mental health crisis, potentially, and things are happening that don't quite make sense in terms of how we understand reality. And so we're kind of deciding as readers how we want to interpret it and whether we think there are these more supernatural elements happening or whether this is all in our narrator's head. And then in this book, for whatever reason, people are reading this and thinking, oh yeah, this is 100% what happened as written, nothing up for interpretation. And I'm not sure why, because once again, the characters that we are hearing from this time are the bunnies. And yes, there are 4 of them and they're all mostly corroborating each other's stories, although they do differ on many points and they'll make it clear. But there's no reason why they couldn't all agree on a story, or just that they're having a bit of a mass delusion because they are so codependent, which is something that was established in the first book, but this book explores even deeper this idea of toxic and competitive and sort of frenemy female friendships that are also deeply codependent and a bit obsessive, where they are kind of losing themselves, losing their individuality within each other. And I don't see why a group of 4 girls, 4 women who have fallen into this kind of a very unhealthy, codependent, hive mind type friendship couldn't all agree on a story or on an interpretation of events that are not necessarily wholly realistic. And then the other point of view we get, who I won't identify in the non-spoiler sections to keep it as spoiler-free for those of you who haven't read it yet, we also don't know that we can trust their point of view, or even if they're real, to be totally frank, because their perspective is coming to us through a journal that was apparently written by this character that the bunnies are reading to Sam to add to their narrative, to add to their own oral retellings of this year before Sam got in on the action. And who's to say that they didn't write it themselves, considering they are 4 former members of an MFA program. Creative writing is kind of their deal. So I don't know, I just find it a bit odd that people, especially who loved the first book, and what they loved about it in part was that ambiguity and it being up for interpretation, are so unwilling to consider that the second book might also be up for interpretation and might not totally be straightforward, and everything might not be completely true or accurate or realistic. You know? I don't know. That's just me. I think that's a bit odd. Also, I really don't think that this over-explains anything. While yes, we go back and we get the bunny's perspective, we aren't really going over the events that Sam wrote about. We're talking about the year before. And most of that, if not all of that, is stuff that wasn't covered in Bunny. Again, I haven't read Bunny for years, so maybe I've forgotten bits where Sam talks about their first year, but from my memory, which is spotty at best, I realize, but from my memory, she is only referring to that first year in passing and really doesn't go over it in any depth and doesn't refer to a lot of the events that they're talking about here. That's just a bit of a weird critique to me personally. I mean, again, everyone has their own perspective and opinion, and if you felt like it over-explained it or was too straightforward or too prescriptive, then you're allowed to think that, obviously, of course. But I just don't see it. To be totally honest with you. Like I said, though, I really enjoyed this. I think it's still bringing to the table all the things that I loved about Bunny thematically. It is exploring the experience of being in higher education for the arts, for the creative arts, in this case, the narrative arts, but sort of the mindfuck that is going to school to study something that is so subjective. How do you get objective criticism on something as nebulous as a piece of creative writing, or in my case, in my education, on how well you performed a scene from a play, or how well you danced choreography from a Golden Age musical? Like, yes, there are certain measures that you can use. Did you actually do the choreography correctly? Did you not fall on your face? Did you sing all of the proper notes on pitch? Did you remember your lines? But in terms of how well you're actually acting a scene, that is very much up for debate. And that's something I personally struggled with intensely while at theater school as someone who was a bit of a type A perfectionist personality, still am, and as someone who always did very well in school and with objective measures of good and bad and what constitutes an A or an A plus. And for me, transitioning over into an environment where my grades were based on the professor's interpretation of how well I emoted during a monologue and whether I interpreted the character the same way they would have or in a way that they feel is appropriate, and whether I made them feel the feelings that they would want to feel from it, it was a very hard transition for me and very stressful. And I loved the way that this book got a little bit more into the weeds of that, especially with the criticism that they're receiving in workshop from their professor, especially in that first year, that the fact that the criticism is quite blunt and possibly harsh, depending on your perspective, and how hard that is for the bunnies, starting with Caroline or Coraline on that first day, to hear such harsh, blunt, straightforward critique of their writing. And I think I'm going to call her Coraline because that's what she calls herself in the book, although my understanding is that her name actually is Caroline. But anyway, everyone has multiple names. It's confusing, but it's fine. She, is talking about it in this very dramatic way of the fact that this is her life's blood. She bled from her soul to create this writing, and it's everything to her, and her identity is all wrapped up in this work that she's done. And for it to be critiqued turns into this scene where she and the bunnies are sort of hyping each other up into this feeling of being violated by having her work critiqued in this way. And as dramatic as it is, I've been there. I have felt that way before. And to get comments about not only my dancing and my technique and my musicality and, my quality of movement, but also things as surface level and seemingly personal as, looking like I'm a bitch, having a bitchy facial expression while doing a ballet exam, and taking it so personally and not being able to emotionally regulate through that criticism of what felt like just me as a person. And I struggled with that so much through theater school, feeling like, it's my voice, it's my ability to emote, it's my body that is being critiqued, and there's no way to separate yourself from that in the way that you might if you're studying science and you don't do great on an exam. Well, it's not a critique of you as a person at your core, it's a critique of your understanding of the material or the way you communicated it. It has a bit of separation from you. And so I loved the way, as overdramatic as it is, I feel that it's very representative of how overwhelming and overwrought and stressful and heartbreaking it can feel to have that kind of critique when it feels like what's up for critique is who you are as a person on the deepest level. And for them, even deeper than my experience, where I wasn't performing my own original material, I wasn't writing a song and performing it, I was, performing repertoire that already exists in the world. I already felt that so deeply and so keenly. I cannot imagine how much more intense that would feel. I only had a couple moments where I performed, a song that I wrote myself, or was assessed on choreography that I did myself or something. And it's so much more stressful. I will say, of course, that these women are in a master's program, so presumably already have an undergraduate degree and are in their at least getting close to mid-20s at this point. So you would hope that during their undergrad, they were starting to develop a little bit more of a resilience to critique. My experience at theater school started right after high school, so I was a little teenage baby at the time, and I was not prepared. I think for them, they do have a little bit more experience, but depending on what their undergrad experiences were like, they may not have had this kind of direct critique of, again, their own creative output that felt so tied with their identity if they'd been taking, like English lit and studying the classics or something before this point. But I also love how Mona Awad continues to examine, like I said, these sort of obsessive, toxic, codependent, hive mind type friendships, and the way that female friendships can sometimes, and male friendships too, although this book doesn't really examine them. Of course, male friendships can have a similar dynamic of feeding off each other and feeling like you have to conform to fit in, and that being taken to an extreme where everyone loses their own individuality, and it becomes this almost masturbatory parroting of each other and a parody of each other in trying to present yourself in a way that makes you one with the collective. And we get a little bit of a hint of that as well from the male perspective with the poets. But again, they're definitely not as prominent in the story as the bunnies. I just think that's such an interesting dynamic. And again, something I can relate to, an experience I had in theater school of creating these really intense, codependent, unhealthy, intertwined bonds with people very quickly because you're in this high pressure, intense, emotionally fraught environment. Those friendships not necessarily being the most healthy, especially because there is that natural competition between you in this kind of environment. And that competition isn't necessarily super healthy for these friendships or, helpful in making sure that they're sustainable and reciprocal and respectful and so on. So I find that really interesting. And I love the way that in this book we get to see even more of what that hive mind looks like. And I loved getting to see the early stages when they first became friends, because you really see that it didn't come naturally. It wasn't this, in my interpretation, supernatural moment where all of a sudden they're all sharing one brain and they're able to anticipate what everyone else is going to say so they can say it at the same time. It is a concerted effort to fit in with each other. And they are testing the boundaries and trying things and having those really, subtle social interactions and subtle rejections in conversation and realizing what is acceptable and what is, revered and appreciated and respected within this particular group dynamic and what is not. And for fear of being rejected, they continue to sort of funnel themselves into this one particular presentation. I think that is a much more interesting and also realistic portrayal of what a friendship of this kind, of this nature, actually looks like, and how unhealthy it can be as people repress their own feelings and reactions and personalities and, ignore their wants and needs so that they can feel like they belong and like they're one with the group. So loved that as well. I also felt like getting the bunnies' perspectives and getting their backstories helped even more to drive home this idea of nepotism in academia, in this case in the creative arts, this idea that these women don't necessarily have that much to say as writers. They've all gone through stuff, and some of them have had more traumatic backstories than others, especially, I would say, Coraline has a very unhealthy relationship with her mother. I would say an abusive relationship, has had a traumatic childhood so far and has dealt with eating disorders and self-harm. So not to say that all their lives are easy and that none of them have ever suffered, but there's even one moment that kind of parodies this idea of being a tortured artist. And I think it's the Duchess speaking at that point, Elsinore, who's saying, just in case you didn't think, Sam, that we also have suffered. Obviously we suffered. We too are tortured artists. We suffered that whole break long, and that's where our art comes from, is that suffering. And that's such a unfortunately common refrain within artistic communities, that you have to be tortured and suffering and traumatized and in pain and had terrible experiences to be able to write art of any value. And this idea that these women who grew up with silver spoons in their mouths and have had any opportunity they might want to have, while that doesn't negate any suffering they may have had in their life, there's a lack of acknowledgement of the privilege that they're coming from. And for some of these women, they got into this program not on the merit of their work, but because their wealthy, connected parents pulled strings to get them into an Ivy League master's program for creative writing. We see them struggle so much with what to write and what they want to say because they don't really have anything to say. They're not necessarily trying to become writers because they have this indelible urge to create and to share and to write stories, that they have a specific or several stories they need to tell to connect to other people. They are rich women who are trying to pick out a career, preferably a career in which they will become rich and famous and much adored, and also seen to be very posh and intelligent and holier than thou because they are highbrow, experimental or literary authors. They're more focused on the ends, that they can see the stars in their eyes, than they are focused on the actual nitty-gritty work of creating art and being a writer and going through the process of killing your darlings which comes up here and is also ironic and amazing based on some of the other elements of the story, which I won't spoil for you. But, they're not interested in the critique and the editing and going through the trenches of revising and revising and revising. They want it to just be perfect right away. And they can't quite accept when that isn't the case. So I thought that was interesting too, sort of getting into critique of nepotism in academia, in the creative arts, wealth, and classism. We get into the fact that these 4 women, with the exception of Cupcake Kyra, who is a quarter Japanese, I believe, the other 3 are white wealthy women. And there is this self-infantilization going on, which is something that I feel is very common. I'll try not to go on a whole sidetrack, but, a common aesthetic or quality of wealthy white women, especially wealthy white conservative women, of self-infantilizing, I'm just an innocent girl and I could never do anything wrong. And, don't blame me for anything bad happening. Don't force me to face any consequences. Don't force me to experience anything too difficult or do hard labor or to deal with critique of myself or my work. I am just a little fairy, and that's really reflected in their affectations and the way that they present themselves, but also in their styling, dressing often like little girls. The first time that Cupcake and Creepy Doll meet Coraline and Kyra, they're wearing fluffy, puffy A-line dresses and Mary Janes and little gloves, and one of them has a dress that has clouds on it, and the other one has a dress that has grass, like a pattern of grass. And those sound like outfits that you put your toddler in. Not to say that an adult can't wear that, but it is, of course, it brings to mind a very childlike innocence, Lolita in terms of styling, not the novel, aesthetic. And that has a very particular, use within wealthy, white, conservative society, this purity culture, this innocence, pure as snow. And even more than that, think about what kind of symbolism, the connotations that come with a bunny, especially pure little white bunnies, which is the kind of bunny that we're seeing in this novel. They're, again, pure as snow, innocence, fluffy and sweet. They're prey animals. They couldn't possibly ever hurt anyone. They're just hopping around being fluffy and adorable. They don't even really have any kind of instincts to protect themselves. These bunnies are just hopping into these girls' hands freely of their own accord. There's just a lot of layered symbolism, and I think it's very obvious what Mona Awad is trying to say with the bunnies and what she's trying to get across with their whole aesthetic and vibe. You must protect me and lead me, a very trad wife, traditional femininity sort of perspective. It's all tied into each other. And I find that very interesting. For these women, we get to know a little bit of their backstories, and especially for Victoria and for Elsinore, they don't seem to have that kind of a personality whatsoever before they join this group, before they become bunnies. Victoria is much more grunge. I think when they first meet, they describe her as looking like a Victorian waif, and she has dark hair that looks like it hasn't been washed in a while, and I think she's wearing like a graphic t-shirt or something. She definitely doesn't have that kind of infantilized hyper femme aesthetic going on, and she doesn't talk that way. And same with Elsinore, she has a bit more of a Stevie Nicks witchy boho kind of vibe before, again, she is part of this group, and the aesthetic seeps into her veins and she starts to become more of this, sort of take on this kind of presentation. And I just find it interesting because it's yet another way for them to lose themselves, but also perhaps commentary on this particular type of woman and this type of performative femininity. Because I've also seen some critique. I haven't read a lot of reviews, but I've perused a few at the top end and low end to get a bit of an idea of what people were saying. And I actually saw quite a few people saying that they felt that this book was misogynistic in its portrayal of the bunnies. And I don't see it. Again, doesn't mean that that's a wrong take. I just don't interpret it that way. I think that this is calling out rich white women for that very performative femininity and the ways that they use it as armor in society. These girls are doing pretty horrific things if we take their accounts as truth, and they're getting away with it in part because no one suspects them, because they are playing this hyper feminine, hyper innocent role and presenting themselves that way and using their privilege as wealthy white women with this kind of squeaky clean, pure, fluffy persona, again, as armor to protect them from suspicion and from consequences. They don't have to take responsibility for their actions because they are just so innocent and lovely. And I don't see that as misogynistic. I think feminism requires us to acknowledge that women also are not perfect because women are humans. Women can uphold the patriarchy and police other women for their presentation and for the way that they're existing in the world, in society. We see that with these characters, the ways that they talk about each other being whores and sluts, even just a specific color of pink lip gloss being whorish. They are very judgmental of each other in a misogynistic, patriarchal, slut-shaming kind of way. And that is them upholding this system. And it's not, in my opinion, inherently misogynistic to point out that women can also uphold the patriarchy, especially white wealthy women. I thought that was just an accepted fact. And perhaps people feel that the way that the bunnies are portrayed is misogynistic because we're meant to find it maybe slightly odd or off-putting or funny the way that they are performing femininity, because femininity is not inherently bad or funny. But I think it's less that they are so hyper feminine and more that it is a mask they're wearing. They're performing it. It's not inherent to them. Perhaps more so when it comes to Kyra and Coraline on a certain level, because they do sort of they show up on the first day in this more hyper feminine presentation, but they're also in their early to mid 20s at this point. They are a result of their environments and the way they were raised, and they could already be wearing a mask of a certain kind at this point, right? I think this is more a critique of specifically wealthy white women, nepotism in academia and the arts, and also rich people having blood on their hands, but not facing consequences, than it is a takedown of femininity and women, especially because a lot of the sort of aspects of the bunnies that is meant to be funny and that we are meant to find sort of fake or uncanny valley about them also applies to the group of poets. Again, they're just less on the page. It's not really about them, but they are also playing a part. They also have this sort of put on pretentious mask of the edgy, artistic guy. They're in this Ivy League master's program. They all probably come from wealthy families. Most of these guys are white, but they're, playing a particular part. They're wearing tweed jackets and black eyeliner and painting their nails black. And then they're hooting and hollering over arson of a bar because it's such high art. And they also have this sort of unnaturally intertwined friendship and don't really have their own individual personalities. And they also don't really have anything to say. They do a very similar thing to the bunnies in a desperate attempt to find inspiration for their writing because they haven't necessarily had the kind of background or had to develop the kind of rich inner life to draw from. They didn't necessarily go to this program because they had a passion for poetry. They went into this program because it felt perhaps like a status symbol to graduate with a master's degree from Warren in poetry and to be one of the cohort. And, it's more like joining the country club or being in a fraternity than it is about the actual art and the creation of it all. So I don't feel that Mona Awad is singling out women in this story. It's just inherently a story about women. And that's sort of where it started. And presumably for Mona Awad herself, her experiences as a woman and as a writer in this world gives her more ammunition. She has more experience to speak to these kinds of relationships than she does for men, perhaps. But again, I don't really see it. I think there's maybe a tiny bit of what could be perceived to be ageism in the portrayal of Ursula, their female professor. But again, my perspective leans more towards seeing her portrayal as someone who is maybe a little bit past their prime, especially now that they have tenure at an Ivy League institution. They are teaching and presumably still working on their craft, but they've kind of settled in. They don't really have strong motivation to create amazing work. Maybe they already said all the things they really wanted to say, or they just, they have a steady income. They have a steady job, they are comfortable, and so there isn't that push to create and to publish the next thing, and they don't necessarily have as much, they're maybe not putting themselves out there as much to experience the world and to get more ideas and to really explore them. And not to say that every author in their later life is going to have that kind of an experience, but I think it's probably not an isolated experience for a tenured professor in the narrative arts to be in this kind of stagnant place where they also maybe don't have that much to say, but they feel as part of their persona that they should be continuing to create this great work when maybe they don't have anything else to say. Because there could be, there are authors out there who can write until their dying day, who could write hundreds and hundreds of books and always have more to say. There are also other authors who maybe have one great novel in them and that's it. And maybe they write it when they're 20 and then they just really don't have anything else to say. And that's okay. Not everyone has to be an incredibly prolific writer. So for me, again, I didn't feel a lot of the language to describe her that I saw people calling out as being misogynistic or ageist felt to me more like metaphors for maybe how she felt or how Mona Awad viewed this kind of professor, of being, a bit of a dried up husk creatively, especially because in the novel, she becomes younger and more vibrant, or at least appears to be as she starts to create. It feels more like a metaphor for her tapping into creation and feeling excited and immersed in her creative work in a way that she hasn't been in a long time. And that gives her back that vitality. It's not so much that she's actually aging backwards or that there's magic involved. It's that she has found this wellspring of creative inspiration, and that is bringing that joie de vivre back, But again, that's just my interpretation. Not to say that anyone who feels that way is wrong. I just, have a different perspective, so I'm sharing it. Oh, this book also touches on quite a bit the artistic process and books being for readers, not for authors, that once you have written something and put it out into the world, it no longer belongs to you. It changes and morphs and grows and evolves in the hands of a reader, in the minds of your readers, and that you no longer have complete control over it. A little bit of a death of the author idea. And I found that really interesting, especially because I imagine for Mona Awad, Bunny is her most popular book by far as I know. And it definitely is the kind of book that is so vivid in readers' minds and evolves and changes. And I feel like every reader has their own interpretation of it, that for her, it must have been, very much a crash course in, you no longer own this work. You can't dictate what it means anymore because the readers have it now. And I felt like that was something she was really exploring in this book, and it was quite interesting. I also love the through line that they are figuratively allergic to criticism, and the way that came back in the unnamed point of view character. I loved getting more from the bunnies. And like I said, seeing how their bond developed in the first place, I thought that context was really interesting. I loved the new point of view character, who I'm keeping a secret in the non-spoiler sections to not ruin anything. Absolutely adored them, found them so lovable and endearing, even though they are objectively a bad person. They are doing bad things. They should probably be in jail, but I can't help but love them and root for them. I also just loved the way that this continued on with all of the silliness and the commentary, but with so much humor, so much obvious, heavy-handed commentary, and the pretension and the over-the-top dramatics. And it was just such a pleasure to read for me personally. I just flew through it and I had an amazing time with it. And I also feel like this is still very much open for interpretation. I think it really is going to depend on the reader and how you perceive these characters and whether you trust them and think they're reliable and being honest in their interpretations, if you think that they are maybe a little delusional or not, if you think they're even real or not for some of these characters. For me, I enjoy that ambiguity, and I think that ambiguity is still there for me personally, despite seeing so many people feeling that this completely rewrites Bunny and tells you exactly what happened and what's true and what's not. I didn't feel that way. I still think there's ambiguity there. Now, do I think this is perfect and as great as Bunny? Like I said, no, I don't. I don't think it was quite as amazing as Bunny. I'm currently sitting probably around 4.5 stars, and I don't know if I'm going to round up or down ultimately. I think for now I'm going to round up because I just had so much fun with it. I am going to get into a spoiler section, but let me know your thoughts in the comments if you read this, what you thought, whether you agree with me, whether you agree with some of these other critiques, if you have other critiques or points you want to bring up, other themes you felt it was exploring that I didn't touch on. I have even more notes, and I also wrote a lot of annotations, lots of marginalia in here that I'm not going to go through because this video is already going to be very long, but I just love Bunny, okay? So I'm going to get into spoilers. Spoilers starting now for We Love You Bunny and also for Bunny, so don't watch the spoilers if you haven't read both of the books in this world, in this series. Spoilers starting now. Okay, so like I said in the spoiler section for the first half, the point of view character, who I'm not naming in the non-spoiler sections, is Arius, our first bunny boy, who is also a mass murderer. And I continued to love him until the very end. He's so endearing. He's so lovely. He is a mass murderer, but he also is a pure soul. And I will defend him till the day I die. I loved his romance with Jonah. I kind of wish they could have ended up together because they were just so damn sweet together. But I get why that wasn't necessarily the best ending. And I did love that he and his first victim, was it his first victim? Yeah, his first murder victim, were able to re-enter bunnyhood together. I thought that was really sweet that they were able to, well, that his victim was able to forgive him for murdering him, but also that they could go back to their natural state and feel like they were coming home and with someone else who had gone through this wild experience of being turned into a person for a while. Or in the case of his victim being a frat boy who was murdered and turned into a bunny and then was turned back into a person by the bunnies and then went back to bunnyhood. Was he a bunny to start with? Not sure. Anyway, loved Arius so much and also loved the fact that, again, his name comes from the allergy medication and there is that through line of the bunnies being allergic to criticism. And also funny how for them, the idea of revising their written work is absolutely horrific. It is unconscionable. They could not imagine it. It is like being assaulted to get critique. But for Arius, they are interested in revising him, in perfecting him, and they will try and try and try to forcefully educate him to be the right kind of bunny boy. And when he runs away, when he escapes, and they keep creating more and more bunny boys, each one is sort of more evolved in some ways as being sort of the perfect boyfriend as they interpret them to be. And I found it very funny as well that they all kind of look like wealthy white guys in finance, because that is the kind of guy that probably these wealthy white women at an Ivy League school are expected to end up with. And I found that interesting as well. Actually, this is another point that I saw some people saying was yet another example of either misogyny or just a lack of diversity, that they didn't create any people who weren't men. I feel like these bunny boys, whether if you think they're actually real, because once again, I think it's definitely up for debate whether they are actually creating anyone or not. I would not be surprised if they are bringing bunnies into the attic and doing rituals and the bunnies stay bunnies, but they are acting like they are boys or believe that they are boys. And then they're murdering the bunnies because they are desperate for inspiration and connection and delusional. But anyway, but they do talk about how multiple of these girls are not straight. It is heavily implied that Kyra and Coraline sleep together the first night that they meet, like have sex. And Coraline is explicit about having slept with women. And they talked about how they tried to create women and other types of people, and they were never able to create anything other than this white guy in finance kind of person. And I think that this is meant to be a metaphor and a representation for them continuing to live out this very performative, traditional, conservative femininity. And no matter how much at their core or even on the surface that they are trying for something different, they have been so indoctrinated into this expectation of who they're going to be and how their life is going to go that they can't imagine ending up with anyone other than this kind of dumb, but able to at least pretend or like put on an act of being intelligent, simpering white guy in finance kind of bro. And I felt like that was just another example of how they're sort of trapped within this performative femininity and traditional gender roles. But I loved Arius so much. I loved his love of Jonah. I couldn't help but feel bad for him every time, even though the more it happened, the more I started yelling at the book, no, that's not Alan. Wait, take 2 seconds to think about it. And then, oh no, he's already decapitated them. Oops, another mistake. Frowny face. Obviously, it's a novel, so, it's not real life, and these aren't real people who are being murdered, but it was just kind of hilarious to me how he kept just flying off the handle and couldn't work against his nature of needing to kill Alan, this programming that's so deep in him that he would just, as soon as he heard the name Alan, he had to immediately decapitate whoever was closest to him. Just very funny. And poor victims of murder being murdered suddenly and turning into bunnies and then being turned back into humans and then enslaved, kept captive in either a basement or an attic by these 4 MFA women who are obsessed with creating the perfect bunny man and then probably going to be axe murdered once again. What a life. And then, of course, also for Arius, we get this a little bit of a Frankenstein narrative. We even get references to Frankenstein in the novel, which was great. We even get a line at one point, well, this isn't exactly Frankenstein bunny. Which, like, it kind of is. It kind of is Frankenstein, you know? And I just love that Arius is this erudite monster going around murdering people, but who is, you know, a tender, tortured soul. Though I find Arius much more likable than I did Frankenstein's monster, the creature in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. But there is definitely a strong inspiration here. I loved that journey for him of coming to terms with who he is and where he came from, and learning to understand as much as he still fears and hates the bunnies on a certain level for what they put him through. He comes to feel a certain amount of empathy and tenderness for them because he sees their pain and their yearning, especially once he falls head over heels for Jonah and Jonah doesn't fully reciprocate, and he feels that heartbreak and he knows how painful that is, and he recognizes in the bunny's eyes that same heartbreak and pain when they're talking about having lost him and the fact that they can never recreate him. As much as he knows that their love is twisted, he feels for them because he now understands what that feels like, that heartbreak and devastation. So I just loved that. I love the mirroring of Frankenstein. It makes me want to go out and see the new Del Toro Frankenstein movie that everyone's talking about that I haven't seen yet. Love Arius so much. And I love his little emojis. People also were complaining about how much they hated the little emoticons, the smiley and frowny faces. I'm sorry, I thought it was cute. Maybe it's the cringy millennial in me, but I thought it was cute. I mean, for even more context of that, we get the bunny's constant assumptions that if they see someone who's a little bit messily dressed, or, you know, the first time that Elsinore sees Arius and he's walking around barefoot, that they're definitely a homeless. And they talk about how you shouldn't ride the bus. Oh God, don't be caught dead on the bus. There are so many homeless here. Avoid them. Oh, those kinds of cars are for poor people. The classism is just dripping off of them. Also constantly talking about how dangerous of a neighborhood it is, and they can't go out at night alone because it's so dangerous, with the irony being that they are literal mass murderers axing people to death in their attic on the regular, and they're afraid of how bad of a neighborhood they live in. They're so in danger when they are the danger, you know? I also loved the ending that they weren't able to recognize that the woman they kidnapped wasn't actually Sam. It was a bunny woman that she had conjured that just kind of looked slightly like her, that she convinced to go do this reading for her because she knew that the bunnies would be there and she didn't feel safe. And the fact that the bunny woman, the conjured woman, took all the papers from Arius and, you know, listened to their story and ran off to Sam. And the implication to me seemed to be that Sam is going to take the story and write yet another bestseller based on their story instead of, you know, setting them up with her agent like they were hoping she would. And I love the fact that they were threatening to murder her, like chop her up with an axe. Although, if she wanted to set them up with her agent, that would be a great trade for your life. Just so ridiculous. And their devastation and how upset they are when they realize that Sam might once again have a bestseller off of their experiences without them, which obviously, like, in a perfect world is not very ethical to do, considering how terrible the bunnies are. And the fact that they thought they kidnapped the real Sam and were threatening to murder her literally all night, letting her sit in her own waste and keeping her terrified. Maybe they deserve it, you know? Anyway, that's it for spoilers for We Love You, Bunny. There's probably so much more I could say, but I've already been talking for way longer than I planned to, so I'm going to wrap it up. Please share your thoughts in the comments. I would love to chat more. If you're sharing spoilers, just notify us at the top so that people who haven't read it yet can skip over it, but I would love to chat more. If any of this made you think about anything you want to dive into, please share it. I would love to get into it with you. There's way less buzz. There are way fewer threads on Reddit, way fewer reviews with extensive comment discussions on this book than I expected to see. I thought that this was going to be way more talked about. So I'm kind of yearning for more discussion. So if you're into it, I'm into it. So that is it for WLYB Bunny. 4.5 stars rounded up to 5 for me at this moment, and I feel pretty good about that. So now that we're done with this, it means we're moving on to the final book for this video, which is The Strength of the Few by James Islington. So I'm going to go start this, and once I get to the halfway point, I'll be back to share my thoughts. Okay, I have reached the halfway point of The Strength of the Few. Let's talk about it. You might be able to tell from the general vibe that I have going on here. I'm not having a great time, unfortunately. You know, to be totally fair, the Hierarchy series, the Will of the Many, was not as much of a favorite of mine as the Roots of Chaos series and, you know, Bunny. I only gave The Will of the Many 4 stars. I say only as if that's not a good rating. I'm a pretty, you know, judgmental reader, as some of you like to point out in the comments. I own it. It's fine. I don't necessarily give 4 and 5 stars that easily, but I did give 4 stars to The Will of the Many, so it's not a terrible rating by any means, but I did have a lot of critiques, a lot of points of contention, pet peeves, frustrations, struggles, annoyances with that book, and it was despite all of that I still enjoyed it enough to give it 4 stars. Unfortunately, though, in reading this, it kind of feels like this book took all of the things that made me enjoy The Will of the Many despite all my qualms and tossed them in the trash. And then it took all the things that annoyed me about The Will of the Many that I was suffering through to get to that 4-star read and just amplified them to the nth degree. It's wild, okay? The first book definitely had a bit of a YA vibe. Our protagonist, who has approximately 14 names in this book, it's actually ridiculous. He already had at least 3 names in the first book. Now, I'm not even exaggerating. I think he has at least 10 different names. Anyway, our protagonist was 17 in the first book, and there was definitely a YA vibe to the writing style. We have a 17-year-old boy who is a Gary Stu. He's good at everything. He speaks a bunch of languages. He's a polyglot. He's stronger than fully grown gigantic men, and he is also a genius in every possible way, and he's also very manipulative and savvy and can present himself however he needs to. He's an amazing actor to, you know, fool even politicians who are in their 40s and 50s and beyond and have access to a huge amount of literal magic power. He can trick them because he's just so smart. Anyway, there's definitely like chosen one saving the entire planet even though you're a teenager vibes from Vis in the first book. And that was annoying to me. It was one of the things I complained about most. Honestly, in my review of The Will of the Many, I'm pretty sure I said that I just didn't like the protagonist at all. And that's true. I didn't like him at all. I liked the book despite him. In this book, without spoilers, I can't tell you how this is possible, but believe me when I say there is even more Vis time in this book. And the first book was first person present tense from Vis's perspective. In this book, there's even more of him. It's all Vis all the time. And it's it's painful, okay? This book definitely leans even more into that YA vibe that I was getting from the first book, and there's nothing wrong with YA if you enjoy YA. I'm just not a young adult anymore, and I feel myself moving away from YA tropes and writing styles and conventions. They just are not as much my thing anymore. They're not to my taste anymore, and that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with them or that adults my age or older can't read and enjoy YA. That's never what I'm saying. It's just me personally. My own taste does not really align with YA anymore at this point in my life. And maybe it will again at some point in the future. It's not necessarily a one-way road, you know? Things may evolve again. But for now, knowing myself, I'm not super into all of those tropes and conventions, like I said, of YA. And while technically Vis is now 18, so he is an adult, this book, again, feels even more YA in its prose, in its character development or lack thereof, because there's even less character development in this book than there was in the first book, if that's even possible in any way at all. Vis feels even more so like a chosen one, extra special, super strong, genius, perfect teenager who's going to save his world and any other world that might possibly exist. And it's a little bit annoying, to be totally frank. I almost DNF'd this after the first 100 pages because I was just bored out of my mind. We have multiple settings in this book. We have sort of 3 main areas that we're exploring, and they're pretty vastly different from each other, which on the surface seems like it would be fun and great. I personally, even now that I'm at the 50% mark, do not care whatsoever about 2 of the 3 settings. So basically, a third of this book is the part that I'm actually invested in and care about. The other 2/3, I'm just waiting to get back to the only setting that I genuinely care about. And it's not like that setting is blowing me away or anything. It's just the only one I actually am invested in and care about what happens whatsoever. So that's not great. At the 100% mark, I was feeling that, but also I was feeling the fact that almost nothing had happened. Everything was set up, establishing these different settings and having Vis discover the same thing over and over again. It was very slowly paced, and honestly, I was bored out of my mind. I almost DNF'd, but I decided, okay, I'm going to read to the 50% mark. I'm going to give it a good chance. I will do at least one update, and then if I really can't do it anymore, then I'll DNF. Now that I'm at the 50% mark, over 300 pages into this, I think it's 350 something, I am finally more invested. Again, literally only in one of the 3 settings, but I am more invested in that setting. I do kind of want to know what's going to happen, despite my frustration with this and how amazing he is at everything, even when he shouldn't be and has no experience and has very practical reasons to be probably not that great at things. He's still always the best. It's absolutely mind-numbing. Anyway, he's also very famous now, so that definitely helps with his ego problem. But I do want to know what happens, a little bit invested in some of the characters from the first book who have carried forward into this one. So I think I'm going to finish it. It is picking up a little bit in pace, and there are actual things happening now, so that's good. The fact that it took literal hundreds of pages for that to kick in is kind of baffling, but it is what it is. I can't see myself loving this based on my experience so far, unless the second half just blows me away in completely unexpected, unfathomable ways. But, you know, maybe it will end up being a middling read. I don't know. If the whole second half continues as it has been, if James Islington can drag me into actually giving a shit about the other 2 settings, then maybe it won't be a total loss. But it's hard to see how that's possible. I don't want to be a downer. It seems like I am very much in the minority based on the tiny bit that I peeked at reviews. There are people whose opinions I generally agree with on books who have loved this and are super into the series, and I'm struggling, but maybe that's just me. It could just be a me thing. I don't know. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'm struggling. Even things like Vis spent the entire first book talking about how he was deeply morally opposed to the idea of will in the hierarchy, that he did not want to use will, which is the magic in this world, and, take life force essentially from other people to serve his own needs as part of this political system, that he felt that that was morally wrong. He didn't want to participate. He never wanted to use will. In this book, he starts using it, and it's not even really a debate. It's just a millisecond of like, oh, shit, I kind of have to use it now. I didn't really want to. Oh, well. And then he starts using it and he's fine. He doesn't care. That whole conflict, that huge piece of characterization for him for the entire first book, tied to his backstory, just doesn't matter anymore. He truly does not care. Nope. He's fine. He'll use it. It's okay. No big deal. Also, the excessive use of vek, which is a swear word, and rotting gods, which is also kind of a swear word. The use is excessive. Okay, Rotting Gods, I searched the ebook, 53 uses. Guess how many times they say vek or think vek, which is basically the F word in this world. Did you guess? I bet you guessed a lower number than the reality, which is 100 times. 100 times. It feels even more than that. It feels like in between every single paragraph, this is either saying out loud or thinking in his head, vek. Sometimes vek, vek, vek. And it's so excessive and it's so annoying. Please stop. Oh my God. Unfortunately, because I searched how many times it comes up in the book, I know it's not about to stop. It's going to continue for the whole book and I'm going to hate it the whole time. I struggled in the first book with how few female characters there were and how the female characters were written. And even more than that, the fact that the world building, one of the few things we learned about the world was this concept of birthright, where this country, this society believes in the importance of life, and it's, seen as one of the worst crimes to take life away, to kill someone. And in my review of the first book, I brought up the fact that I was pretty disappointed that there was never any examination of how such a entrenched law or belief of birthright would impact half the population in anyone with a uterus and their reproductive rights. Do they have reproductive rights? Can they use birth control? Are they able to get abortions? How does that impact women's place in society? We don't know. And I still don't know in this book, unfortunately, because while there are some female characters, there are definitely side characters, mostly in the background, and there has been zero commentary whatsoever on how this society handles reproductive rights and how that impacts women, which just feels like a huge oversight for the amount that birthright was emphasized and talked about over and over and over again in the first book. In this book, it's only come up once or twice, maybe 3 times in passing, but still no references and no acknowledgement of how that kind of a law has very different implications for people with uteruses than it does for men. Apparently, it doesn't matter in this world. Most of the women in this book, of which there are maybe a handful at most, want to kill this, and honestly, relatable, but also a little bit boring when it comes to characterization for women. We also get the moment where Vis sees his old trainer for the first time since the last book, and it's written as "the live woman entered the room," which is so weird because she's not a stranger. He knows her and knows her name. Describing her as a live woman, it's not like any of the other characters that we knew through the whole first book are described as "the bulky man walked through the room." They're all just described as, oh, this character walked in, or a dude came in. But of course, when the female character shows up, it's a live woman. Well, great. I think one of the things I'm struggling with most, and also one of the aspects of this that makes it feel the most YA coded to me, is that it is written in first person present tense, which is just not my preference. I feel a little too close to the character, and I do love character-driven stories, and I love getting to know characters, but I just find it a little, there's not enough distance for me as a reader to feel like I'm able to observe and have a bit more of an objective view of the character and the circumstances, because everything is filtered through their own perspective so closely. And for Vis especially, we spend so much time in his head. Honestly, we spend so much time with Vis just on his own, thinking to himself, not interacting with anyone or doing anything of note, which is not my favorite for obvious reasons, because I don't like Vis very much. But also we get so much time of him sort of micromanaging our perception of him. He'd be like, I acted like I forgot to destabilize them, but of course I didn't forget. I have the memory of a steel trap. It's just us constantly in his head as he hypes himself up and talks about how smart and amazing he is and how he's smarter than everyone else, and occasionally acknowledging that things are actually hard for him, but then talking about how he perfectly acted as if it was super easy for him because he couldn't let anyone know that he didn't expect to win every single thing and that everything wasn't easy for him. He wants them to know that it's just the natural order of things for him to be the best. It's exhausting. It's truly exhausting. And I do think if it wasn't first person, it would be a little bit easier to handle him, but unfortunately it is. So you can't escape. I also don't remember this particularly from the first book. Not that the chapters were excessively long from my memory, but here the chapters feel even shorter, punchier, and often end on either a cliffhanger or just a very dramatic statement to get you to turn the page immediately. And I just am not a fan of that in general. It's not to my taste. That's what I'll say. There's nothing necessarily wrong with it. I just don't personally enjoy it. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I can say without spoilers, and I think I've exhausted all my non-spoilery complaints. So I will do a quick spoiler section to elaborate a little bit, and then I'm going to go and see if I can finish this. We'll see. So spoilers for The Strength of the Few and also The Will of the Many. If you haven't read The Will of the Many and at least the first half, The Strength of the Few, skip this unless you know you're never going to read this series. Okay, spoilers. So basically at the end of the first book, one of the reasons why people loved the book so much is that there was a shock ending where Vis basically gets transported into an alternate reality at the end, which I also thought was shocking, did not expect it, thought it was interesting. So at the start of this book, we kick off with 3 Vises. Vis has been cloned twice, and his clones have been sent to other universes, is how we understand it. So original Vis is still in Res, which is the Roman world. And then Vis 2 is sent to Obitium, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, which is the ancient Egypt inspired world. And then Vis 3 is sent to, what is it called? Lucium. Either Lucium or Lucium, which is an Ireland or Scotland inspired world. So we have 3 Vises now, which is what I meant when I said that somehow there's even more Vis. And the only world I'm interested in is Res. And at first I was interested in the ideas of these other worlds. At the end of the first book, I was really excited to see what would happen to this Vis in this other world that had run into his adopted father's brother, who he thought was dead for all these years. I was really excited for that. So far, not a lot of movement on that. It's not nearly as interesting as I expected it to be. I also find the Egypt-inspired world and the Ireland, I guess, inspired world very underdeveloped, and the characters in those worlds are just not interesting to me. The storylines are not interesting, especially the Ireland world. He's just training again. He's training to be a fighter. Okay. The other world, at least he apparently needs to kill the king. So that's a bit more dramatic, I guess. But so far, it's a lot of stabbing dead people and forcing them to do your bidding. Not as exciting as you would think it would be. Res is the only world I'm interested in, so that's already 2/3 of the book that I am struggling to get through because I'm just not invested in those plot lines, in those versions of this, or in the other characters around him. In Res, at least, we still have some of the same characters from the first book who we got attached to, although most of them don't have a lot of page time, to be honest. And we still have a bit of the mystery from the first book that this Vis is trying to figure out, put the pieces together. And I am at least mildly invested or interested in discovering more of what's happening with that, sort of who's at fault, who knows what's going on and who doesn't, and kind of the machinations behind that. I can't say that the plot in Res is that interesting either. So far, it's mostly him joining the hierarchy and getting his own pyramid and also doing a bunch of tests, kind of like he's back in school to prove that he's good at using will. And of course he is, because he's actually the best. Even though he's lost an arm, he is still the best compared to everyone else. And we haven't made a lot of progress. Very little actually continuing forward anything from the first book or the investigation. They just got back to the academy, so maybe we'll learn something now. But again, we're halfway through the book, 350 pages in. Most books would be done by now. And we're still setting things up and nothing really has happened. The most exciting part of this entire book so far for me was the chariot race, because at least it was high octane, excitement, fast paced. What's going to happen? I don't know. I was kind of hoping Vis would fall off because I'm a petty bitch, I guess. But he didn't, unfortunately. He kind of won. I mean, technically his partner won, but they won. Who's shocked? No one is. But at least it was exciting. I think the chariot race started maybe 40% of the way through, so that was the first time that I was really engaged and immersed in the story. Other than that, not a lot happening, unfortunately. Like I said, it's all Vis all the time, multiple versions of Vis, and also multiple versions of Vis that are coming to the same realizations. multiple times in different worlds, or remembering the same anecdotes multiple times in different worlds, which is tedious. Like, I get that they're technically the same person in that they are clones of the same person, so they have the same experiences and will probably have similar thought patterns, but I don't want to read it 3 times. I don't even really want to read it once, to be totally honest. But we have so many names for all of them. We have Vis, who is also Catanicus in the first book. Also, his original name was Diego, I think. We have Vis 2, who is going by Siamon now. Vis 3 started going by Diego for a bit, like his original name, and now I think he has another name, which I didn't even bother to write down because I just really don't care about the Ireland world whatsoever. He's learning to fight with a spear amongst a bunch of teenagers. I'm disappointed in this so far, if you couldn't tell. Anyway, I think I'm gonna be done now because I'm tired. Those are my spoiler thoughts. I'm feeling a bit demoralized, to be honest. Like I said, I had sort of mixed feelings and a lot of critiques of the first book, but overall I enjoyed it and I was excited to read on in the series, and I'm just really disappointed that this is turning out to be such a slog. So I'm hoping it continues to get better and better and better, and by the end, my struggle through the first 200 plus pages is just a distant memory, but I don't know how realistic that is. Either way, I'm gonna go try to finish this, and I'll be back when I'm done to share my final thoughts. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'm gonna go finish this. Pained smile. Wish me luck. I need it. Hello friends, I have finished The Strength of the Few, so I'm here to share my final review, my final thoughts, and Yoda, my cute little pumpkin, decided now was the time that she required snuggles, so she's here too. Don't mind her. Anyway, The Strength of the Few, let's see if I can balance a cat and hold this giant brick of a book at once. Oh, she laid down. That's very helpful. Thank you, honey. So Strength of the Few, finished this. Took me a minute. Thoughts and feelings, thoughts and feelings. Where do I even start? So much happened and also so little. My issues with the first half continued in the second half, unfortunately. I still didn't care at all about 2 of the 3 settings here. So essentially 2/3 of this book just didn't do it for me. I will say there were a few moments in those 2 other settings here and there, especially near the end, that had me a little more invested or got me in the feels. But to be totally honest with you, I don't know that those feelings were entirely earned by the amount of character development we were actually given for those characters. It felt more like I am in a bit of a vulnerable place currently with grief and feeling a lot of my own feelings, and reading about loss or grief of any kind, even if the characters involved don't mean anything to me and I don't know anything about them, is going to make me tear up and get emotional because I'm feeling all those feelings constantly right now. There were a few character deaths in this book that felt like a cheap trick, a bit of emotional manipulation, a bit of shock value. There are many other deaths that happen here, and most of them, including the one that probably made me the most emotional, I think makes sense within the context and for what's happening thematically and for Vis's character development, although to be honest, he really doesn't get that much character development, but that bit. Vis didn't have a lot of character development here, but one of the character deaths was a driver of significant character growth for him, so I think it makes more sense. And for other contextual reasons that I won't get into for spoilers, there are times, and it's, different people are going to react differently, have different opinions about what counts in this category. But for me, so far, many of the character deaths in the series feel unearned and feel like the author is trying to force me to be sad, to try to force me to be emotionally invested in the story, and also to just shock me by killing characters that you don't think are going to die, that you think have plot armor, and their deaths don't really matter at the end of the day. And I'm frustrated to see that pattern continue. It's something that really frustrates me quite a bit. There are a lot of things that James Islington does, a lot of quirks of his writing, choices he makes with plotting and structure and pacing and character and world building and tropes, and they just rub me the wrong way. And in the first book, I felt like I was able to see past so much of that because I was invested in, like I already said in the halfway point update, the world building and the intrigue, the mystery, what's going to happen, what are the answers here, invested in some of the side characters and wanting to know what happens to them, and just interested in general in this world, this magic, and wanting to see that developed further, and kind of hoping that Vis would have a bit of character growth and become more complex, a little less of a Gary Stu, a little less insufferably irritating. And I just don't feel like the sequel delivered on that for me. For me, the sequel was a significantly more painful reading experience than the first book, despite all of my frustrations and struggles. And I read the first book in a reading vlog, so you can watch my reaction in the moment and my complaints about the many things that annoyed me. And I was definitely struggling through parts of the first book, and there were definitely a lot of things I didn't like and a lot of critiques. But again, it ended up being a 4-star read, and I ended up really excited to continue on in the series. And at this point, I just can't see myself continuing on in this series. It's just not for me. And I'm definitely disappointed that I can't be one of the many, many readers who are loving this series, having an amazing time, so excited to continue on, waiting for each new release. I just didn't care about so much of what was happening. And that's a risk that an author takes in taking us away from one point of view, one setting, one sort of primary plot line, a bit more linear, to splitting us in 3 and chopping everything up into these really short chapters, and at most giving us 2 chapters in one setting before jumping to another, and just really not giving us enough time in any of these places to really settle in, introducing a bunch of new characters who don't get nearly enough character development for us to care about them or be invested, introducing 2 more cultures, religious systems, political machinations, and conflicts and wars, and so much going on. So much going on. And I feel like the other 2 settings could have easily been separate books of their own, either in a completely different series or just other books. Maybe other people wouldn't like that. It does seem, again, like a lot of people loved the way this was set up. I just felt like it was too chaotic. There was too much going on, but also simultaneously not that much going on, because plot-wise, things moved extremely slowly until the very end, which honestly is similar to book 1. And the more I think about my experience with book 1, I think the rush to the end, the climax, and the fast-paced excitement of the ending and reveal after reveal gave me a bit of rose-colored glasses to the rest of the experience. Whereas here, while there still is a bit of that ramping up at the ending and a few reveals and things that happen in a similar way to the first book, I think, again, because we're split into 3, it's just not nearly as effective. Not only because, like I said, we haven't really developed roots in each of the settings, and we aren't as attached to all these different characters and as invested in all 3 plot lines necessarily, but also just that there's less page time for each to deliver on these climaxes and endings. Some of these big, exciting battles and moments and confrontations went by so quickly because I think there just wasn't the opportunity to give them more page time in a book that was already so massive. And I mean, there was so much setup and it was so slow that we definitely could have had more time for the climaxes of all 3 plot lines, but that's not the book we got. And the setup here was just, it was like pulling teeth. I was struggling so much. The second half was easier to get through than the first half, but only marginally for the majority of it. So much of this book is just us hanging out in Vis's head as Vis thinks about things. I think I talked about this a bit in the halfway update, but we not only get Vis remembering conversations and quickly summarizing them for us in his own head, instead of actually getting to experience the conversations, to see how it impacts characters, to share things that are difficult for them and how people react to that in the moment. We just get Vis reporting on it in his own head very dispassionately, which is not enjoyable to me personally. It's not a style of writing that I connect to or enjoy particularly. But we also get all the stuff that I'm pretty sure I brought up in the halfway update and also talked about in the first book of Vis being the most Machiavellian, manipulative, 2 steps ahead of everyone else, so good at modulating his tone and changing his facial expression and picking exactly the right words to ingratiate himself with anyone at any time. And what annoys me most is that he's so sure of himself and the narrative sort of treats him as being good at all these things and, very charismatic, and everyone loves him. He's super famous now and very popular, and everyone is obsessed with him. He's setting trends all over the place, literally. And yet, when we actually look at what's happening in the plot, so often he's not tricking people or not charming people or not actually 2 steps ahead of people or figuring things out or solving anything. He's often making things significantly worse, but it feels like the narrative wants us to think that he is actually doing a good job when we can see with our own eyes that he is in fact not doing a good job. So I don't know. I just feel like I'm not under his spell. He had a couple interesting moments in this very long book, but only a couple, and considering how deeply this is a series about him and only him all the time, there should be more going on for him. We should get more character development. And here, I not only felt like many of the growth moments for him, or many of the moments that we got of reflection on his past, or moments of grief or regret, were simultaneously rushed through, but also brought up so many times, rehashed over and over again, but in a very surface level way. And again, it's kind of hard to get into the specifics without spoilers, because there are many things I could spoil about this book on its own, but also about the first book. So I'm really trying to walk a tightrope of sharing my thoughts without spoiling anything for you. But I just found this very frustrating, especially as a character-driven reader. I just feel like there's very little going on with the characters here, very little character development, very little complexity for a lot of these characters. They just don't really feel real to me, and that's something that has a huge impact on my enjoyment personally. I already briefly mentioned the short chapters in the way that they made the reading experience feel very choppy because of the 3 different settings and very short chapters that would just jump between them. And as soon as you started to get used to being in one setting, you would jump to another one. But also, there were so many chapters that didn't have to be split up into separate chapters. We would finish a chapter with a word or a name or a sentence, and then the next chapter, if it did continue in the same setting, would just be the same word or sentence or name repeated to start the next chapter. And at that point, I just think, well, if you're continuing on from that exact moment to the point where you're literally repeating how you finished the last chapter, just make it one chapter. Why does it have to be a new chapter? I'm very impacted by the formatting of a book, I guess, and the structure. And if you write these really short, choppy chapters, to me, the reading experience feels very short and choppy. I never feel like I can fully sink in and just root down, ground myself, settle into a perspective or a setting or part of the plot and really get used to it and get invested and immersed. Jumps on to the next thing. I found it chaotic and overwhelming and frustrating, personally. This one also ended on a bit of a cliffhanger and setting us up for the next book. It doesn't really have a conclusion. Very much a from point A to point B book, carrying us from where we end the first book to wherever he wanted the third book to start, I guess. I don't know if this is meant to be a trilogy, but it kind of feels like the next book is meant to maybe bring our 3 settings together and have the big conclusion and bring everything together. And I just can't say that a second book setup connecting book 1 to book 3 had any reason to be 700 pages long. That's just excessive on every level. And I don't feel like there was enough substance here, despite it doing so much, despite it being spread so thin. So those are my feelings. Was I blunt enough, someone's going to tell me that I'm mean in the comments. Anytime I give a less than positive review, I get told I'm mean. But the thing is, I'm literally always the same level of honest and blunt about my opinions. It's just when my opinions are positive, no one has a problem with it. And then when my opinions are negative, people get upset. But I'm always being just as honest and just as upfront and blunt about my opinions. I just feel like that's more helpful for you. I think James Islington is doing just fine. He has so many fans of this series, and again, genuinely happy for him and happy for all the readers that love the series. This book is not for me, but it's clearly for many, many people. So unfortunately, I'm going to be done with this series. This was enough of a painful reading experience that I don't really want to put myself through that again. Though I think that's all I can really say without spoilers. So I am going to do a spoiler section. Let's do spoilers now for the strength of the few. And like I said, we have 3 versions of Vis because he got cloned twice. So we get Vis again and again and again, discovering the same things 3 times over, but never getting to experience it in real time with him as he discovers anything. Every time it's a quick summary of him learning some big thing, and we don't really get to experience it in the moment or be there. It's just someone telling us that something happened, but then we have to experience that kind of summary type storytelling for 2 other versions of this over and over again. We also have lots of characters coming back from the dead. So Vis's dad is technically still dead, but he's one of the zombies who are able to walk around and function through will, through magic. So he meets his dad in the Irish world, but then his dad sacrifices himself for his son so that Vis can survive. So he loses his dad again. That made me very emotional, and that was the one sort of shocking death in this book that I felt really made sense for Vis, for his character development. And it made me very emotional because I lost my dad this year. But again, I think I was emotional because I lost my dad this year and not necessarily because I cared about Vis and his dad particularly, or that the book did an amazing job at developing them in their relationship. I do think it was one of the better developed relationships of this book, but I don't know that that's saying that much because, like I said, the character development and the relationships here are just, there's not a lot of time spent on them. So there really isn't that much development happening. We also get to see one of Vis's best friends in this second book die, Aqua. I don't know if I'm pronouncing her name correctly, but she is someone that we meet in the first book, and she becomes one of Vis's closest confidants and best friends in this book and is there quite a bit in the Roman world. And she gets brutally murdered by someone who hates Vis just because he thinks that Vis deserves to suffer because he has suffered and he blames Vis for it. And it was so pointless. It was so needless. Again, that was by far the death that felt the most like, here's shock value and repeating what happened with Vis's best friend from the last book. Where he just was shockingly murdered suddenly for no reason, and it didn't impact anything or matter at all and felt very unearned and frustrating for me. Once again, it didn't matter at all that she was killed. She had no impact on anything, apparently. No one seems to care, really, except for Vis in the moment when he's upset, but she dies brutally, and we get to watch that happen just 'cause, I guess. It made me very upset, actually. She was probably the female character with the most page time here, and she didn't get that much development, but she got more than she got in the first book. And then, oh, sorry, now she's dead because we need a reason for Vis to be mad. Great. Love female characters being murdered so our male protagonists have more motivation to go off and murder lots of other people. Amazing. We also have a female character in the Egyptian world who gave up her young daughter to be turned into a zombie because she thought it was a great honor and immediately regretted it and tried to get her daughter back. And for 20 years has been trying to figure out a way to basically fully bring her daughter back to life, or bring all of her daughter's memories and her personality back, because she's a bit of an empty husk, an empty shell. And she sacrifices her daughter fully, finally, for Vis, someone she has known for a few months. And yes, she's also hoping that this means that Vis can take down the man who has been responsible for doing this to many kids. So I guess that's a great sacrifice, and technically she is already dead. But again, it just felt like, oh, now we're going to kill a little girl for shock value and to be a tear-jerking moment where we're really emotional because this mother is finally letting go of her daughter. Like, you didn't develop that relationship enough, or either of these characters enough, especially the mother character, for me to be invested in this. Like, I'm going to be sad because the idea of a mother losing her child for good is sad. And I have feelings because I'm not a robot. But again, it feels a bit like emotional manipulation and not like an earned moment of emotion, because you've really developed this character and this relationship and we are invested in them. Like, and then of course we get to the end, and Vis in all versions has become like the most powerful, amazing person ever. In the Roman version of himself, the original version is going to have an 80,000 strong zombie army. And he's the only person in this entire world with his special synchronous power. So good for him, I guess. He's going to be more powerful than like anyone else on the planet, basically, and have this unbeatable army because anytime they kill anyone, they can be added to their zombie army. So he gets that. The Irish Vis, his dad sacrifices himself to save him as he's being drowned because he was stabbed in the stomach and then tossed in a body of water. I can't remember if it was a lake. I think it was a lake. And also he had a metal arm strapped to his amputated arm that was sort of bringing him, like sinking him to the bottom. So he was drowning, but also stabbed. And because of the power of this special amulet that stopped him from dying, it also heals you very quickly, and it sort of healed the arm to him, this metal arm, which also now somehow magically, I guess through will, he's able to manipulate and move very smoothly as if it were just another arm. So now he has two arms, and also all the Irish-inspired people think he's a god because he didn't die, even though he was in the lake for a long time and also stabbed in the stomach. And now he has this malleable metal arm, and he also defeated a great warrior. So he's going to be revered as a god in that world, basically. And then in the Egyptian world, it finishes off on a cliffhanger of him stabbing who he thinks to be Ka, who is basically a man who's been alive for at least 1,000 years and is the one who's basically running all three of these worlds and responsible for the cataclysms and enslaving a bunch of corpses and manipulating all three of these worlds. So yeah, Vis has had a lot of wins, unsurprisingly. And also at the very end, our original Vis is reunited with his mother and one of his sisters because they were being kept in this giant crypt full of 80,000 corpses ready to be used as an army. So he gets reunited with them, and also his BFF from the first book, who was killed for shock value and emotional manipulation and literally had zero other impact on the plot whatsoever, or characters really, is brought back too. I mean, he's not named, but it's pretty obvious that he's back. And that is the final cliffhanger, is that he's actually not dead and they'll be reunited, I guess. So there's that. I mean, they are all technically dead, but he gets to talk to them again and hang out. So that's nice. He also basically murders his adopted mom, who was part of the rebellion, because he's decided that what she was doing was unethical, but he's also willing to control an 80,000 person army of corpses to presumably do the same thing she wanted to do, which is topple the hierarchy, which probably is going to involve a lot of bloodshed, which he couldn't apparently forgive her for. So, okay. Oh yeah, I guess that means that that's a third woman / girl who was killed in this book. That's nice. Oh yeah, this book really wants us to believe that Irish Vis is more at home than he's ever been, and this place is his home, and this is his family after he's known them for 5 seconds. And again, there's so little time spent on this world, I don't know for sure, but I'm curious to know the page breakdown of the three worlds, because to me, the Irish world felt like it got the smallest amount of page time by far, but that's the one that we're supposed to be the most emotionally invested in and think that Vis has found his people and his home and he's finally where he belongs. And I'm just like, okay, really? Is he? Can you show us that instead of just telling us, which is maybe my complaint for most of this? Please show us things, anything. I beg of you, because you just telling me that now these are his family and this is his home after a couple chapters that are a couple pages long, not working for me. I'm sorry, it's not resonating. I noticed more swears that are overused and variations of the ones I looked up in the first half, so I'm just gonna put a tally here of the ones I noticed most. Both the original ones I mentioned in the first half, so Vec and Rotting Gods, but then also just rotting on its own, God's Damned, and then God's Damn It, and also God's Graves. So those are the ones that I'm going to look up and let you know how many times they're all said, because it felt excessive to me. It was constant. Vec is the one that stood out most to me, but all of them were annoying. And it also made me realize, because the exact same swears are used by everyone, which I mean, to a certain extent, swear words are often linked to language, so that might happen even cross-generationally, but there were characters who were in their 70s using exactly the same swear words as our 18-year-old protagonist, and I just struggle to believe they are drawn to the same curse words, swear words, colloquialisms, vocabulary, ways of expressing themselves across that kind of a span of age. Usually generation to generation, there are different ways of expressing ourselves. We have different speech patterns, different slang, and different swear words that we are more drawn to. So the more I started noticing the cursing specifically, the more I realized that every character spoke exactly the same, with very few exceptions. I mean, some of the older characters or more mysterious characters spoke a little bit more formally, but honestly, if I didn't have the little tags letting me know who was saying what, I'm not sure I'd be able to tell you who was talking at any given point, because they all basically had the same voice. And that is definitely a huge drawback for me, just my personal preference. I want each character to feel like they have their own voice, that they are their own unique person, and that they're influenced by their circumstances and the world they live in and their experiences and the people they know, and on and on and on and on. I want them to feel real. And these characters felt like characters, not like real people, to me personally. Also, what is with Vis destroying powerful artifacts before he knows anything about them or what they could do, and also the repercussions possibly of destroying them? Like, people will give him something and be like, this is a really powerful object, and they'll tell him what it does, and he just either doesn't believe them that it's true or doesn't care, even if he does believe them, and just destroys it on a whim. And it's like, first of all, even if you don't believe them that this does what they say it does, you really haven't done more investigation into what's going to happen if you destroy it. Not only would you maybe need this later for something important and realize that, oh shit, I destroyed the only artifact that could save the world. Oops, look at me being impulsive again. But also, maybe you're going to destroy it and one of the worlds totally collapses because it's holding it aloft in the void of space. I don't know. You don't know either, Vis, because you don't ask any questions. You just break shit. You just turn shit to dust in your hands because you feel like it. Why do you do that? Why are you like this? Anyway, also he gets a wolf dog, which I don't really mind. Wolf dog is cute. He did name the wolf dog after himself, so that's kind of weird, but it is what it is. His wolf dog gets what should be a fatal wound near the end of the book, but somehow survives and is fine. No explanation for that. But I'm glad, because I like the wolf dog is cute. I guess. It is a little murderous. It did murder a whole room full of senators, even though Vis was telling him not to do that. So there's that. But I mean, I like animal companions as much as the next person, so fine. It very much felt like new lore, new rules for the magic system were introduced every time we needed them, because we needed the magic to do something new for the plot. But often it just wasn't explained. He just did things, and I'm like, okay, how are you doing that now? When did you learn how to do this? You just magically can because you're a chosen one? Okay, but how does that work? Why does it work? Where is this coming from? How and why can it do so many things? What is the source of the will? Do we know anything? No? Okay. Anyway, I'm tired now. I'm going to be done talking about this. That's it for spoilers for The Strength of the Few. I'm going to stop talking about it. I think my feelings are very clear. I didn't absolutely despise this book, but I also didn't like it. So I think I'm going to give it 2 stars. I think that's fair for my experience. There were a couple moments I liked. There were a couple quotes I liked. The second half was more engaging than the first half, but I just didn't have a good time and it wasn't for me. And I'm not going to continue on with this series. So 2 stars for The Strength of the Few. Let me know your thoughts on the book in the comments. Even if you disagree with me, I think you probably will, because it seems like I'm in the minority, but I would love to hear your opinion regardless, and your thoughts on all the things I talked about, even if you disagree. Mark spoilers appropriately for all your fellow viewers, but I'd be happy to chat with you, even if you had a different experience with this book. And to wrap this up, I'm going to do a little bit of a ranking, which is probably going to be obvious because everything had a different rating for this video, but we'll do it anyway because I like doing rankings at the end of my videos. The Strength of the Few by James Islington is going on the bottom, unfortunately. I'm trying to prop my knees up so this will be in frame. Among the Burning Flowers at 4 stars comes in next. And then We Love You Bunny at 4.5 stars rounded up to 5 comes in on top. So this is my ranking for this reading vlog. Those are my feelings. Those are my thoughts. Those are the books I read. I've probably been talking for ages. This video is probably long, so I'm probably gonna go, but thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you all. Like this video if you liked it, subscribe if you haven't already. If you're here, if you watch this whole thing, you should probably subscribe because I think we're friends now. I think that's how that works. Leave emojis that represent these 3 books in the comments down below. Let me know your thoughts on these if you've read them. Let me know if you're interested in picking them up if you haven't read them yet. Check out the Freo FAQ 202 LED mask and their amazing Black Friday deals at the link in my description box. And don't forget to use code BRIDE35 for an extra 35% off almost all products. This is a stackable code, so you get 35% off on top of the already incredible Black Friday deals all over their website. So don't miss out. Click the link in my description box and check out Freo today. Thank you again for sponsoring this video. And with that, I'm going to get going. Thank you so much for watching this video. I appreciate you all so much, and I'll see you really soon in my next one. Bye, friends.